Hello, everybody, and welcome to our last lecture before our second exams next week. So today we're going to go over both chapters 20 and 21. 20 is a little bit short. It's the lymphatic system. 21 is the immune system, and it's a bit of a beast. So I'm going to save that one for its own video, obviously, but both of these are going to be kind of long. So hang on tight. And before I even get started here, I wanted to show you on our Canvas homepage. First of all, my announcements are visible on the homepage now. Sorry about that, but they're here now. You could have found them. You can always find them here, but now they're available on the homepage, which is nice. I posted an announcement with some study tips and a few resources. I literally just Googled studying for nursing, or how to study in nursing, or how to study, any of these things. This is actually provided by Norco College, or RCCD. It's part of the student resources down here in the left-hand side. Check that out for a couple of other things, more like Canvas tech related kind of stuff. But I also want to show you that there is NetTutor and StudyMate. StudyMate is a flashcards maker, which is kind of nice. NetTutor lets you ask questions from tutors somewhere out there, and they'll get back to you. I'm not sure how long it takes, but you can ask specific questions, which is kind of nice. But this is a video that has a quiz in it and a little helpful walkthrough on what kind of learner you are and how to make a study schedule. So making a study schedule is critical for success in higher education, in education in general. But now that you're in higher education, you're gonna want to make a study strategy, which probably involves making a study schedule. So use this video/quiz to find out the basics on where to start in making your study strategy that works for how your brain works. And your study strategy you can take with you for throughout your educational career and probably your vocational career. It's just basically figuring out how you learn best, which makes everything easier, right? So here's some basics. It took me a long time to figure out how to study. This is what I've learned. These are some websites with study tips. After you figure out what kind of learner you are and make a study schedule, these are some ideas on what to actually do during your study time that you set aside for yourself. And this is a video that I made a couple of semesters ago on my personal favorite study way of studying, especially things like biology. It's basically a dry erase board or a piece of plexiglass with dry erase markers and making a one-pager on a very large surface. It's really nice to be able to color code and link concepts together all in one place. You can see it all. And trying to do that without without reading so much. So reading it and getting familiar with the material first, and then trying to lay it out in a way that makes sense to your brain, spatially. As a visual learner, it's always been my go-to. It's a huge help for me. So go ahead and watch this video, just a little short tutorial on how I went about doing that. And this week's to-do list has all the usual trappings. We've got our 2 chapters for reading, our 2 lectures. Your homework this week is a little bit longer because you've got 2 chapters worth of this My Lab and Mastering homework. You do have a, I believe this is another Labster simulation. And then I put the discussion in here as well. I know I wasn't really that clear about the first discussion, so I extended the due date for that to be the same due date as this one. It's basically just answer one of the questions, and then in future discussions, I'll probably have you ask a question and answer a question, and that way we won't have a bunch of leftover questions that go unanswered, because I want everybody to have their questions answered, and that's the whole point of a discussion. So I'm still figuring out the logistics of this, and that seems like it'll work better. Either way, make sure that you get this done by Sunday, which may be Easter. So maybe I'll extend it to Monday, actually, in case you are Eastering. Yep, it's Easter. Okay. Your dynamic study modules for both chapters here under additional resources. Do them. If you're wondering what to do to study, you can spend your time doing this. It's great, be great for that. I've also got a couple of other outside websites that have good information about specifically the lymphatic and immune systems. Dr. Lee's virtual histology is really good for this and back for endocrine as well. So you literally have some tissue slides that you can explore. I know I've shown you this a bunch of times, but I just can't get over it. It's just really, really cool. So do not, don't miss out on checking that out. And do not miss out on watching these videos, you guys. If you're trying to figure out what to do to try and expose your brain to this information in a new way, these are excellent. So it's a 3-parter about the immune system. It goes over lymphatic stuff kind of throughout. And then it really goes into some great detail about the immune system. You know, watch them as many times as you need to until it starts to kind of sound familiar. And while you're doing that, you know, quiz yourself, or after you're done doing that, quiz yourself with your dynamic study modules, right? So it's about studying in small chunks frequently and exposing your brain to the information in different ways until it clicks. So reading the chapter is one way, watching a lecture video is another way, watching YouTube videos is another way, doing quizzes is another way. The study area in My Lab and Mastering is also a great way to study. Since I've gotten so many questions about studying, I thought I would take a little bit of time to basically just show you what I've got, what my thoughts are on helping you guys to prepare for this next exam, since I know a lot of you were kind of freaked out after the first one. Over here in My Lab and Mastering, the study area, there is a lot of great resources in here. Explore it, check it out. Besides even the dynamic study modules, you've got practice tests, there's animations and videos, you have a practice anatomy lab, which is kind of cool. And then it has flashcards that are like pre-built for you. You could just like download these, your PhysioX labs, above and beyond the ones that are actually assigned. They are all here. So explore this area if you're trying to figure out how to spend your study time. Choose the things based on your learning style, right? Animations and videos if you're audio or visual. Art labeling activities if you're artistic or visual learner. Your dynamic study modules, quizzing, flashcards, whatever you think will work for you, whatever you just try it. Try all the things and you will eventually figure out what works for you. And then when you kind of narrow it down to a couple of things that work really well for you to retain the information, it'll make your studying, 1, less scary because you know what you're going to do. And 2, it'll make you use your time way more efficiently because you're not like floundering around trying to memorize this information in ways that your brain won't accept it. So figure out what your study strategy is, guys. It's a skill, it's a life skill. It's not just a college skill, it's a life skill. Okay, anyway, chapter 20, the second to last, besides 21, that's gonna end up on your second exams next week, okay. The lymphatic system has the function of housing your immune system and producing a lot of your immune cells. So it's gonna be where your lymphocytes, which you might suspect are cells of the lymphatic system, right? Sites are cells. It's going to be where your immune response is generated a lot of the times against foreign antigens, which is a term we're going to talk about in the second half of this lecture, the second lecture video. It also is has the important function of returning body fluids to the bloodstream. So this whole idea of, well, the circulatory system, it includes your blood vessels, but it also includes these lymphatic vessels because the circulation in your body of your bodily fluids includes all of that interstitial extracellular stuff, right? All of the humors of the body, all of these different body fluids They all come from the blood, and they all need to be circulated back through the blood. They need to be filtered and cleaned and like replenished at any time. Further, if these fluids, if there's too much of these fluids coming from the bloodstream, you're gonna need a way to take those fluids back up, right? Edema, having fluid buildup in different body areas is usually a dysfunction of the lymphatic system. So having fluid buildup is a result of the lymphatic system not pulling that fluid back out into the circulatory system, reintroducing it to the bloodstream, and like, you know, circulating that fluid around your body. So that interstitial fluid gets returned to the bloodstream via the lymphatic system, and you are transporting lipids and lipid-soluble vitamins into the bloodstream via the lymphatic system. So there are these are the four functions of the lymphatic system: to return your extracellular or interstitial fluid back into the bloodstream, circulating that extracellular fluid, transporting lipids and lipid-soluble vitamins into the bloodstream, producing and acting as a site of maturation for your immune cells, and generating or giving a place for an immune response to occur. These two will probably make a little bit more sense later. So let's kind of break it down into all the key players. We have the vessels, the lymphatic vessels. We have the cells of the lymphatic system. We have lymphatic organs and lymphatic tissues. So let's start with the vessels, because that's where your textbook starts, and it starts on page 767, in case you're wondering. So kind of like your cardiovascular system, the vessels of your cardiovascular system, which we're going to talk about after spring break, your lymphatic system also has capillaries, okay? The big difference, of course, between the lymphatic and the cardiovascular system is that the lymphatic system does not have a pump. There's no heart for the lymphatic system, right? But you do have capillaries, which are the tiniest of the vessels for the lymphatic system, as blood capillaries are the smallest, tiniest vessels of the cardiovascular system. So your lymphatic capillaries are microscopic, they're so tiny. Instead of being having a turnaround in terms of like oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, like your blood capillaries have, your lymphatic capillaries are they dead end, okay? Your blood capillaries don't dead end, but your lymphatic capillaries do. They are found weaving all throughout the capillaries, the blood capillaries throughout your body. So your blood capillaries are found near the surface of the skin and deep inside of the tissue of your organs. So basically, it's like the very, very end of the oxygenated blood before all that oxygen gets taken up, and then it returns as deoxygenated blood. Where that kind of turnaround is, that's where you have a web of very, very tiny capillaries. So that includes your little lymphatic capillaries. They're all tangled up in all of that. Okay, so they're throughout your body. Wherever there are blood vessels, you also have lymphatic vessels. The only place that you do not have lymphatic vessels is in your bones and teeth. The walls of your capillaries are of your lymphatic capillaries are a little bit different than those of your blood capillaries. The walls of your blood capillaries have epithelial cells which might separate from each other, which we're going to talk about more when we talk about the immune system. But the walls of your lymphatic capillaries have this interesting, like, overlapping flap-like structure that you can see here, as well as some kind of strange little filamentous fibers, which actually help to anchor it to the connective tissue that these capillaries, that all of your kind of blood vessel, these beds of capillaries throughout your body kind of exist within connective tissue, like so many things in your body does. Since your blood capillaries are basically just one chain, one continuous chain, they don't really need to be anchored so much. But since your lymphatic capillaries are like these dead end tubes, they might like get moved around, right? So you have these little filaments which anchor the ends of the capillaries in the connective tissue surrounding the capillary bed or throughout the capillary bed. These fibers are made of collagen, so they're little collagen fibers, so they're very strong and a little stretchy. And when the extracellular fluid in between all these blood vessels and these cells of the connective tissue, or what have you, becomes a higher volume or a higher concentration than inside of these lymphatic capillaries, then these overlapping epithelial cells actually can act as one-way valves. So when there's more fluid on the outside of the ends of these little lymphatic capillaries than there is on the inside, then these little overlapping epithelial cells collapse. They get pushed down by the pressure of all of this extra fluid all around, and that extracellular fluid will go into this dead-ended lymphatic capillary. And that's how the extracellular fluid is taken up by the lymphatic system for eventual return to the cardiovascular system, to the blood vessels, to the bloodstream. Pretty cool, right? So again, here you can see the lymphatic vessels are kind of moving in tandem with blood vessels. They hang out with blood vessels. They look similar to blood vessels, except that they are thinner, and they've got all these funky little one-way valves in them, which is very, very important. So since your lymphatic vessels don't have a pump, there's no heart associated with your lymphatic system, the only way that you're able to move lymph, which is what we call the fluid, that extracellular fluid as it travels through the lymphatic vessels, to move that lymph, it literally moves via the squishing action of your skeletal muscles moving around. There is also a little bit of smooth muscle pushing, kind of a peristalsis happening as well in some of your lymphatic vessels, the larger ones. But a lot of movement of lymph in your body is from like touch and from skeletal muscle movement. So every time that you like squeeze your lymphatic vessels, wherever they are, that fluid is going to be forced in one direction. And so every time you move, you're forcing that fluid in one direction, and then it cannot backtrack because it's got one-way valves throughout it. Your veins, your blood vessels that are taking blood back to the heart, deoxygenated blood back to the heart, they also have one-way valves in some cases. But your lymphatic vessels have many, many more of these because they do not have they don't have a heart, they don't have a pump to pump this fluid through. Pretty awesome. Okay, so we've got lymphatic capillaries at the smallest end. If we move up, we've got in size, if you will, we have collecting lymphatic vessels. So from the capillaries, the lymph travels through lymphatic vessels, collecting vessels. Then we've got lymphatic trunks. So these vessels will come together and form larger vessels that we call lymphatic trunks. And lymphatic trunks tend to be paired on either side of the body. So for example, you've got your right bronchomediastinal trunk here and your left bronchomediastinal trunk over here. You don't need to be able to identify those on an exam or anything. I just wanted to let you know you've got these paired trunks. Here's your left subclavian trunk, which is going to be below the clavicle, right? Right subclavian trunk mirrored on the other side. Lumbar trunk left, lumbar trunk right. Intestinal trunk is the only one that's not paired. That's your single trunk, okay? Not paired, right? So lymphatic capillaries, lymphatic collecting vessels. So we have lots and lots of capillaries kind of coming together into vessels, coming together into trunks. It's almost like a river system, right? It's like a river flowing from a delta. It's like if it went backwards or from a marsh flowing into the inland, right? It would be like lots and lots of tiny little inlets going into like a creek, turning in, and they all come together and become a stream, and then they all come together and become a river. It's kind of like that. So the lymphatic trunks are pretty large, but they're not the largest. The largest instead are your lymphatic ducts, okay? And you have two major lymphatic ducts. They each collect the lymph, they receive the lymph from different parts of your body, and they are not equal. in any way, shape, or form. Your right lymphatic duct, which is in green here, is going to basically take lymph from everything that's green. So basically this side of your head and neck, your right arm, and the right side of your thorax. Your thoracic duct is going to receive lymph from the entire rest of your body. Left side of the head and neck, left arm, left thorax, abdomen in its near entirety, and both of your legs, believe it or not. I don't know why this is, but it's a trick. And they talk more about it on page 769 of your text if you want to check that out. You should have already checked it out. Remember, do your reading. I don't mean to talk about it as if it's optional. You should probably do your reading. You should definitely do your reading. Okay, so this is also showing you nodes here, but I want to point out the ducts. So your thoracic duct, which is the big one that takes the lymph from all over the rest of your body, that is going to basically go to the cisterna chyli, or chyli. I keep wanting to call it chyli, chyli. And your right lymphatic duct goes into the some of the major blood vessels, the veins here in your upper thorax and neck. And here is the entrance of your thoracic duct into the blood vessels of your neck, okay? So these guys go to the major cistern, which is basically a very large lymph node. But eventually they make it to the blood vessels, and this is where they enter. This is where the thoracic duct enters, and this is where the right lymphatic duct enters, okay? All right, actually it probably has a lot to do with which side of the body your aorta is on, actually, interestingly. But don't worry about it, I'm just thinking out loud now. Okay, so we've talked about lymphatic vessels, capillaries, collecting vessels, trunks, and ducts. Now let's talk about some cells associated with your lymphatic system, okay? Lymphocytes, right? Cells of the lymphatic system. You've got two main types of lymphocytes, B cells and T cells, B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes, okay? You'll see these terms used interchangeably. B cells are the same thing as B lymphocytes, and T cells are the same thing as T lymphocytes, okay? Your T cells and your B cells originate in the red bone marrow, which, if you recall, is found in the ends of your long bones and in the bodies of all of the rest of your flat and irregular and short bones, right? From part A, you should remember that. So generally speaking, the ends of long bones is where you have most of this happening. Your lymphocytes start there. They're born in the bone marrow. Both are born in the bone marrow, or they are bone marrow derived, if you will. The T cells go from the bone marrow after they reach a certain stage, and then they get moved to the thymus, where they complete their maturation. Okay, they can become several different specific types of T cells. They can become cytotoxic T cells, or otherwise maybe known as or referred to as TC cells. They can become helper T cells, which are little TH cells, suppressor T cells, and memory T cells, which I don't believe we have shorthand for in this text. So basically, your undifferentiated T cells start in the bone marrow. Later on, they move to the thymus, where they mature entirely and differentiate into these various different types of T cells, which we will talk about more when we talk about the immune system, chapter 21. Your B cells also originate in the bone marrow, the red bone marrow, but they stay there. They don't ever go to the thymus like your T cells do. So the B cells stay in the bone marrow, where they continue on and differentiate into various blood cells, and then eventually are going to be cells that B cells, B lymphocytes, are cells that produce antibodies, okay? That's what they do, most of them. So they can be cells of the blood, or B cells turn into antibody producing cells. We'll talk more about them when we talk about the immune system as well. And finally, natural killer cells. I want to call them natural born killer cells, but they're natural killer cells, or NK cells if you want to be boring about it. These guys are kind of like roving assassins that go around and attack anything that's not recognized as self. So they go around and attack invading cells as they find them throughout the body. They also can attack your cells, human cells, self cells, which are infected with a virus. So they basically receive a signal from those cells that something's wrong, they've been invaded, and then they will like mercy kill them. They also will mercy kill cancer cells, which are, as we know, self cells that have just kind of gone haywire. Why our bodies still get cancer? You know, limitations of the immune system. But we are capable, our immune cells are capable of recognizing cancer cells at least some of the time, maybe a lot of the time, you know, maybe the time that you actually, you know, get a diagnosis is, you know, stuff that got by, obviously, right? So here you can see our 3 different types of lymphocytes. Your natural killer cells, which just attach to an infected cell or an invader cell and destroy it, basically trigger it to trigger apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. So they can trigger apoptosis in a cell. Your B cells, which may become plasmacytes and produce antibodies. They can also, and these are the little antibodies on the surface of a different B cell, they can also recognize non-self cells and trigger apoptosis or destroy them in other ways. And then your T cells can become cytotoxic T cells, for example. This is just one example of T cells, which also can recognize a foreign or abnormal cell and trigger apoptosis or destroy it in some other way. Okay, so we've got your natural killers, your B cells, and your T cells. Okay, let's talk about some tissues. Okay, where do these cells live? We know about the lymphatic vessels and how they get moved from place to place, but where do these cells, when they are mature, where do they end up? Where do they live? So your lymphoid tissues, because the lymphatic system, it's got a lot of weird components, right? So you have these vessels, you have specific cells, of course, you have tissues, and you have organs, but it's like really dispersed throughout the body. And it's not like an organ system where you just have like a set number of organs, they're all connected, yada, yada, yada. No, the lymphatic system is like spread out throughout your body with some organs and with other like masses of tissue that also play important roles. So it's not as nice and cut and dry as like your digestive system, but it is what it is. The tissues of your lymphatic system, otherwise known as lymphoid tissues, are literally just tissues that house your lymphocytes. So that's where your lymphocytes live, and give them a place to multiply. Okay, so they give them a place to divide. It is again throughout your entire body. So you've got an ideal situation for monitoring the entire body. So it's really, really important that the place where your immune system, or the places where your immune system lives, is not just like localized in one place, because what happens if you have an injury on the other side of your body? Your lymphatic system is spread out over your entire body so that this doesn't happen. You can trigger a strong immune response throughout your entire body, wherever infection may happen. It does this, or these types of tissues can be diffuse, which basically just means that they are spread out. In other words, like not in an organ. Basically, what you're seeing here is loose connective tissue. So remember from part A, we talked about different connective tissue types. There was loose connective tissues. One of them was called reticular loose connective tissue. this is what that is, or that is what this is. Loose reticular connective tissue is made up of reticular fibers and the fibroblasts, those cells that produce those fibers, reticular fibroblasts, okay? So you've got reticular fibers in this lymphatic tissue. You've got your reticular cells, which are your little fibroblasts, which are making the reticular fibers. And then you've also got your immune cells hanging out in here, including your lymphocytes and macrophages, which are great big cells that go around phagocytizing or eating other cells, namely abnormal, infected, or just not recognized, not self cells, okay, invading stuff. In between, you've got your medullary sinus, okay? So this diffuse lymphoid tissue is literally just wherever, kind of wherever there is reticular loose connective tissue throughout your body, which is going to be throughout your body, in between your organs, in between your skin and your muscle, but more concentrated in some places than in others. In places where it is very concentrated, we might refer to it as lymphoid follicles. Okay, so basically follicles are basically places like little cradles where your little B lymphocytes are being born outside of red bone marrow. So where they divide, where they also can divide in lymphoid follicles. So it's basically just little clumps, follicles as in clumps of tissue. Okay. Oh, that is not legible. Okay, hang on. We can do better. No. Pen. Yeah, pen. Thank you. Pen. Clumps. That's better. All right. So your lymphoid tissue can be a lot of this loose reticular connective tissue. And then you do have some organs on top of having like this kind of like loose dispersed connective tissue that also houses lymphocytes. And then lymphoid follicles, places where you've kind of got little clumps of this reticular connective tissue and lymphocytes. Then you also have proper lymphoid organs, okay? And your lymphoid organs, as we understand them, come in basically two flavors. You've got your primary lymphoid organs where your lymphocytes are born and mature, basically, which are your red bone marrow and your thymus, okay? And the thymus is like right underneath your sternum in front of your heart, generally speaking, okay? So again, your B cells and T cells are born in the red bone marrow, okay, where they're undifferentiated. The T cells get migrated over to the thymus for final maturation. And then the B cells will either mature here or they can move to some of these other lymphoid tissues. You can see them here, where after they have differentiated, basically, where then they go and divide. Okay. Okay. Secondary lymphoid organs are places where lymphocytes can be at any given time, and different types in each of these different places. So your secondary lymphoid organs include your lymph nodes, right, which is this system, all these green guys, the little nodules throughout the vessels. So each one of these little nodules is a little lymph node, okay? So your little lymph nodes are secondary lymphoid organs. The spleen is a secondary lymphoid organ. That guy is hanging out over here by your left kidney. MALT, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, is associated with the mucosa throughout your body. Okay, so places that produce mucus. So mucosa is basically any of your body cavities, as well as the mucosa of your digestive system. So your basically your orifices, right? Your eyes, nose, mouth, back of your mouth, pharynx, throat, your reproductive openings, your urinary system openings, digestive system openings. So anywhere where you have mucosa, which is basically just epithelial tissue that also produces mucus, so epithelial tissue that's not keratinized like your skin, you're going to have MALT. It's part of this diffuse lymphoid tissue. And then finally, you have what are called Peyer's patches. And these guys are associated specifically with the intestine and the appendix, okay? These guys are, they're little patches or nodules of this lymphoid tissue. So it's places where this lymphoid tissue is concentrated, specifically at the intestines and the appendix, okay? I don't think I have a slide dedicated to the appendix, but I was doing a little bit of reading. It seems to have some functions of the immune system. It may be a place, a reservoir for gut bacteria, which we are starting to understand has a very strong role in our immune systems. But it may actually also be a place for like an immune response above and beyond just being a reservoir for your gut microbiome, which is your gut bacteria, your healthy gut bacteria that produce important factors that your immune system needs to function properly. So you have to keep your little garden of gut bacteria healthy so that they can continue to produce vitamins and other factors that are important for other parts of your body, other systems to function. All right, including your brain. Mental health has been linked to the gut, so take your probiotics. All right, so let's go into a little bit more detail on each of these, okay? Starting with your lymph nodes. So again, the lymph nodes are these little lumps found along the lymphatic vessels. They are concentrated in areas where the lymphatic vessels tend to do a lot of branching, which happen to be the axillary area, which is your armpit, the inguinal area, which is your groin, and then also your cervical area, which is your neck. Okay, so you have a lot of lymph nodes happening in your neck, your armpit, and your groin. So they tend to cluster in those areas. Each lymph node it's actually more of a little organ compared to a lot of the other stuff that we've been talking about so far. It's got a capsule, a little connective tissue capsule going on here. Lymph nodes from all around will enter a lymph node, okay? Once it enters a lymph node, it's going to enter the subscapular sinus here to where it goes to the medullary sinus, to what is called the hilum, and out to the next blood vessel, or in the case of the ones that are like right adjacent to the trunk, into the bloodstream. So let's talk about this stuff here. So the capsule is connective tissue. Parts of this connective tissue dive down to form a scaffold. Okay, hence the subcapsular. Okay, so the capsule is formed by connective tissue. Some of that connective tissue dives down deep, and it surrounds these little kind of like chunks. And each chunk has a medulla and a cortex. So cortexes, as we know, cortices tend to be on the outsides of things, and medullas tend to be on the insides of things, right? We've already talked about a couple of examples of that. The adrenal gland has a cortex and a medulla. The medullary cavity is the hollow inside of your long bones. And then like the cerebral cortex of your brain is the outside of the brain, right? So same type of thing happening here in the lymph nodes. You've got your follicles where you are producing so you're producing other immune cells, not necessarily lymphocytes here, but you are also providing a place for lymphocytes to hang out and mature. The B lymphocytes, the B cells in particular. So all of that fluid, all this lymph that's being collected from all over the body, wherever you have capillary beds, right? That extracellular fluid that's being taken up. Viruses, bacteria, fungi, any pathogens, if they make it into the body, they may have come in through the skin, for example, they're going to find themselves in this fluid, at least part of the time. They're going to be in the extracellular fluid, right? If they're going from cell to cell or looking for a cell to infect, they're going to be doing that by swimming through extracellular fluid. So as that extracellular fluid is being drawn up by the lymphatic capillaries through the collecting vessels to the trunks, eventually getting into a lymph node, that virus in that lymph is going to encounter an army of immune cells in here, and they will take care of it. And not only will they take care of it, but they will also make memory cells so that they will recognize it the next time and get it even faster. And that's how your immune system works in a nutshell, but we're going to be talking in a lot more depth about it in our next half of this lecture. So generally speaking, it comes in, it makes its way over to this depression right here on the lymph node, which is where it's called the hilum. It's basically just this depression where these vessels come out of. We'll see the term hilum one other time, but generally speaking, it just means like a depression in an organ where vessels emerge, enter or exit. Okay. All right, so lymph nodes have a connective tissue capsule. Many different vessels might go into a particular lymph node. It contains immune cells so that anything bad coming up with the lymph that your lymphatic system is collecting will be taken care of in the lymph nodes. If you have swollen lymph nodes, if you notice having swollen lymph nodes like anywhere that make you kind of uncomfortable, it's likely that you actually have a pathogen, you caught a pathogen, and it's in that lymph node or those lymph nodes, and your body is taking care of it. So it's really a good thing. If it turns chronic, stays for longer than a couple days, then that's something you might want to have checked out. But generally speaking, having that pain, I remember having a little bit of pain on this side after I got my first COVID vaccine, which was so fascinating to me. So I had a little bit of lymph node pain in this armpit. And I was just fascinated because it's literally my body reacting to the vaccine, which is pretty cool. All right, the next of your lymph organs, your lymphoid organs, is the spleen. What a strange, very strange little organ here. So you can see how it's tucked up here against the diaphragm, right? So this muscle right here, that's your diaphragm that helps you to breathe, right? Your spleen is a place where basically you filter your blood, okay? So it's a reservoir for red blood cells, otherwise known as erythrocytes. It is a place where, so as you can see, you've got a splenic artery going in and a splenic vein leaving. So inside of here, you have a bed of capillaries where that blood is going to get filtered. And basically what it filters out is going to be your old, dead, defective red blood cells, erythrocytes, and platelets. And so that you have nice, clean, fresh blood leaving through the splenic vein. In addition, there are also macrophages, which are immune cells. Again, those very big immune cells that eat bad things, they eat pathogens, and old and defective erythrocytes. They will be the ones that actually are going to phagocytize those cells, whether they are pathogens or in the case of the spleen, these are going to be your old defective erythrocytes as well. Eat them, put them into a lysosome with digestive enzymes, break them down into their smaller subunits so that the parts can be recycled, or in the case of a pathogen, just gotten rid of. It's also a reservoir for blood. So it's actually a really important organ to have in the case of preventing or mitigating hemorrhagic shock, right? So if you lose a great deal of blood, your spleen may actually save your life by providing a blood from this little storage reservoir that it provides. Pretty awesome. If you were to, oh, actually, first of all, from the outside, okay? So you've got this kind of this crevice or groove on the underside here. So think of it as like a beam, and the part of the beam that's kind of like concave, that's another hilum. And it's where the splenic artery and the splenic vein enter and exit this hilum. This makes it look like a potato a little bit, but that's okay. Where the splenic artery and vein enter is called the hilum. The white pulp of the spleen is literally this lighter colored stuff here. You're going to have a lot more of the immune response happening here. So anything that comes in is filtered out of the blood and from these arteries that is like pathogenic. You're going to initiate an immune response, which we're going to talk about when we talk about the immune system. Okay, so an immune response is it's a whole thing. So your spleen can initiate that entire process, that whole cascade of events here, as well as you've got macrophages already living here that are going to start taking care of it right away. The red pulp, which is the pink stuff that the rest of the blood vessels are kind of embedded in, the veins and all these little capillaries are embedded in. That's where you're going to have the worn out erythrocytes, red blood cells, and the blood-borne pathogens are going to be destroyed. So they're detected in the white and then eaten up and destroyed in the red pulp, okay? That's how your spleen works. Next down the list of lymphoid organs, MALT, again, mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. So this is stuff that is associated with the mucosa throughout your body, wherever that may be. This image shows an example of the mucosa, which is part of the lining of your small intestine. Large intestine, excuse me. So if this is the hollow inside of your large intestine, or the lumen, the mucosa is going to be underneath the epithelium. Okay, so this is the epithelial tissue here. Here is your MALT, which is really just like, again, like a clump of that lymphoid tissue. So this is that reticular connective tissue, loose connective tissue with a lot of lymphocytes and macrophages in there, okay? So it's located in the mucosa of the GI, like the large intestine. You're also your respiratory tract, right? Your nasal passages, your trachea, all the way down into your lungs. You have mucosa like throughout there. Your genital tracts and your urinary tracts. You also have mucosa here, because anywhere where you have a connection to the outside world, bad stuff can get in, okay? So having mucosa there to be a physical barrier, first of all, the mucus itself literally physically traps pathogens and debris and brings it to places like this, to areas of MALT. And then that MALT itself, when it does receive anything from the inside of that hollow organ or the outside of the body, it's going to initiate an immune response. Okay, so the lymphocytes in this lymphoid tissue are going to go off, right? So you should be kind of noticing here that there's a lot of different ways that your body defends itself with the lymphatic system in terms of like literally spatially across the body. We have a lot of protection in our orifices for obvious reasons. Anything that's associated to the outside environment has very strong protections, but you have multiple ways that you can trigger the immune response. You can trigger it by picking something up from the interstitial fluid, right? Lymph going into a lymph node. You can pick it up in the bloodstream as it's being filtered through the spleen, and you can pick it up through the mucosa that's going to be lining any of your body's orifices. So it's pretty intense. And the lymphatic system is kind of like the brick and mortar part. Okay, we're talking about where all this stuff happens before we start talking about what the immune response actually is. Before I get ahead of myself anymore, obviously the MALT is going to be monitoring for pathogens, for bad things, otherwise known as antigens. So your antigens can be pathogens or anything that is non-self, okay? Antigen, we're gonna talk more about antigens, obviously. Moving on down the list, more lymphoid organs, your tonsils. So these ones you probably have actually heard of, right? You've got 4 different, I think they're paired. I think they're all paired. Yeah, the pharyngeal tonsils are back behind your nose on the back wall of your pharynx. Okay, so your nasal cavity and the back of your throat, they are connected by a tube, and that whole thing is called the pharynx. The pharyngeal tonsils, otherwise known or sometimes referred to as the adenoids, they are up here, like way behind your nose, the back of your, the very back of your upper throat. If you ever like, not to be gross, but to hawk a loogie and you like snort up some snot, or if you like drink milk and laugh, milk, soda, whatever, water and laugh, and you have that come out of your nose, that tube, that connection is where those fluids would pass back and forth between your nasal cavity and your mouth, the back of your mouth. Anyway, the pharyngeal tonsils are in the top part behind your nose in the back of your nasal cavity, which is also part of your pharynx, okay? The palatine tonsils are the ones that the doctor looks at when you stick out your tongue and say, ah. Okay, so those ones are the 2 that doctors tend to look at. They're the largest, and it's really obvious when they're really inflamed, right? So you can see them really easily. The lingual tonsils are way back at the base of your tongue, so not as easy to see. And then finally, you have tubal tonsils that are actually at the entrance of that tube that connects your middle ear to your throat. So remember from the very, very end of part A, we talked about the pharyngeo, I think it's like the pharyngo-auditory tube or the auditory tube or the eustachian tube, whatever. It's the tube that goes from your middle ear into your throat to release pressure from your middle ear. You have a set of tonsils on either side of that tube to make sure that anything coming in from there or anything trying to get it up in there doesn't make it. Your tonsils, so when you think about this like in 3 dimensions, right? So you've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8 behind those tubes. They're kind of forming this protective circle around some of the most important and exposed orifices of your body, right? So your little pharyngeal tonsils are protecting or are guarding against anything coming in through your nose. Your palatine tonsils are guarding against stuff coming in through your mouth. Your lingual tonsils, also stuff coming in through your mouth. And your tubal tonsils, stuff like coming in or going up into your inner or middle ear. Pretty cool. So you have this like ring of protection in the form of your tonsils. Their structure gives them this really weird like physical ability too to like collect pathogens, which is kind of weird and gross. So they have a capsule of connective tissue, but that capsule kind of dives down into these like blind-ended, what are called the tonsillar crypts. So this is literally like a tube or like a gap or an invagination into the tonsil where literally like mucus and whatever crap that you swallow or breathe in through your nose can get trapped in really easily. And that's on purpose. You want that stuff to get trapped in here because now it's going to be right up against all of this tissue, which again is lymphoid tissue. Even though it's more, a little bit more granulated, a little bit more like concentrated in the form of these tonsils. That's why they kind of get a name as their own like little things, these tonsils. But you've got these germinal centers for lymphoid follicles, which again are just places for your lymphocytes to divide. So you've got your immune cells in here already. You've got these invaginations or tonsillar crypts in your tonsils where like bad pathogens or I guess I should say antigens can get caught down inside and basically not have any way to escape your immune system there. It is a weird risk for your body to take, right? So like as kids, you get a lot of tonsil infections because you really kind of have overload of pathogens and infections. When you're a little kid, you haven't been exposed to a lot of stuff yet, right? Of course, if they get infected, we call it tonsillitis. And if you end up having to have them removed because they're just causing more harm than good, then we call that a tonsillectomy. And that usually has to do with the palatine tonsils because they are so large and because they can block the throat, so they can impede eating and breathing. But if they do their job properly and not too much, if they don't get overrun too often, then this is actually a really, really great place for your immune system to like build its catalog of all the different things that you've been infected with. They get met here a lot of the time because we breathe and eat all kinds of gross stuff from the outside world without ever knowing it. Finally, the last of the lymphoid organs, Peyer's patches. So again, these guys are specific to the intestines. They're going to be inside of the mucus lining the small intestine. We can see them in this image here. All of these little, it's like these little like blobs, little granulated blobs of lymphoid tissue. Aggregated lymphoid nodules, just another word for follicles or just little places where the lymphoid tissue is congregated, okay, or concentrated. Okay, so it's found the distal portion of the small intestine, so that would be the portion that is farther away from the stomach, right? The farther away part. So towards the end of the small intestine, you've got these Peyer's patches. These guys are hanging out here waiting for stuff to be passed from the lumen of the small intestine through the epithelium that's lining the small intestine and get past, at least past, if not directly through these Peyer's patches, where that stuff basically gets checked out for any baddies, any bad pathogens and stuff, and they get taken care of, and the immune response can be initiated from the Peyer's patches. Pretty cool. So you've got a lot of different weird lymphoid organs happening here. Oh, last one, almost forgot. The thymus. Your textbook puts this one last, so I did too. I'm not sure why. It's on page 776 if you want to read more about it. Again, this is where your T lymphocytes go to mature entirely. Okay, so they're born in the red bone marrow, but they come to the thymus to mature. T cell maturation happens here. Okay, so your thymus is not really a place for your immune system to like be actively functioning. It's just a place for your T cells to basically like graduate their final exams and go on to be grown-up, mature T cells. So you can think of them as kind of like a little, not so much maybe like a nursery, but maybe like a little finishing school. It's just a little finishing school, but nothing really happens here except for that. They just do the finishing of the T cells maturing. Your thymus is ginormous, relatively speaking, when you are first born. Okay, so when you're first born, it's seriously like this. It's like huge, this big thing here. As you get older, it shrinks. It kind of atrophies down until it's just sort of like a little bit of, I guess, just this epithelial tissue and like the surrounding fat and connective tissue and stuff. They still churn out T cells, mature T cells throughout your life, but that process is like way more active when you are first born and kind of slows down as you get older. So having T cells mature literally just means that you're kind of like teaching them to respond to a particular antigen. So as your life goes on, you're exposed to more and more antigens, which can be pathogens or pollen or whatever. Then your T cells, you have T cells basically that have been educated in each of these things. So as you get older, you don't need as many of them as you do when you're first starting out and you're exposed to this nasty, disgusting world that we live in, right? Okay, and again, it's underneath the sternum, just superficial to the heart, okay? Just anterior to the heart. All right, it doesn't have any B cells, it's just for T cells to live in. And technically speaking, lymphoid follicles are places where B cells divide, okay, propagate. You have epithelial cells forming the body of this gland or organ, lymphoid organ, rather than that reticular loose connective tissue that we've just gotten so used to with all the rest of the lymphoid organs. So the thymus is a little bit weird. Epithelial cells, not so much the reticular connective tissue. Kind of bizarre. Thymic corpuscles are just these little whorls of epithelial tissue in there. I think we do have slides of the thymus available for you to be looking at on Thursday, so check it out, see if you can find a thymic corpuscle in there. I don't think we know exactly what they do. Bizarre structures called thymic corpuscles, concentrated whorls of keratinized epithelial cells, thought to be sites of T cell destruction, are involved in the development of regulatory T cells. Very cool. I'm not going to test you on that. Just thought it was interesting. You also have a cortex and a medulla for the thymus. So when you look at your thymus slides, you will notice that you do have this you'll have a transition of different looking cells around the outside compared to deep in the center of the section of the thymus, and a connective tissue capsule. All right. Oh, I do have a slide for the appendix. Look at that. Okay, so your appendix is this little worm-like structure that hangs off the end of your large intestine. Your large intestine has a sac at the end of it. You'll notice that the large intestine doesn't like go directly into, or I'm sorry, the small intestine, the end of the small intestine doesn't go directly into the very end of the large intestine. It kind of goes into the side of the end of the large intestine. So that sac that's left over here, that is the human version of the cecum, which you will see when you, you will likely see it when you dissect your rabbits. Rabbits have a huge cecum, and the appendix is at the end of the cecum. The cecum is like a dead end hollow organ where food matter, plant matter in the case of rabbits, goes in and gets churned around and then makes its way through peristalsis, finally up the rest of the large intestine. It's very small in humans because we haven't evolved to eat like roughage, like straight, raw leaves and twigs and things. And the appendix was thought to be vestigial for a long time, but again, it probably has a role in the immune system, not least because it's likely a reservoir for your gut microbiome. Very cool. All right, so tubular offshoot of the large intestine. It prevents overgrowth of bacteria. So the more good bacteria you have, the less likely it is that bad bacteria will be able to overrun inside of your body. So if we want to, one, keep your intestine walls very, very healthy so that stuff can't leak in or out. But you also want to just have a nice, strong population of good bacteria that can always outcompete any bad bacteria that comes in. They'll always outnumber it, ideally. And then the immune response, or the immune part of your appendix, is thought to be that it actually is able to generate your memory lymphocytes for your long-term immunity. So it helps your lymphocytes to generate that memory that allows them to attack a previously seen pathogen or antigen faster and stronger than the first time it saw it. So having that memory gives you really an upper hand. Here is a breakdown of your lymphatic organs, your lymph nodes, spleen, malt, and thymus. Your appendix is not here. And the Peyer's patches, those are not here either. So remember, you also have Peyer's patches, right? And your appendix, right? Your red bone marrow, which is also considered to be your other primary organs, right? Whereas everything else are your secondary lymphoid organs. I hope that's not too awful. Sorry about that. All right. Here's a little list of the functions which you need to know for each of them. The functions, I think, are going to be the most important part. Whether they have a cortex or a medulla, that is something that hopefully will sink in during lab on Thursday, but you won't be able to recognize them without also recognizing that they have a cortex and a medulla, I expect. What the stroma is made of, most of it is reticular connective tissue, right? Like we talked about, except for the weird thymus, which for some reason is epithelial tissue in there. But that's really it. Those are the basics there. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and take a little break, and then I will come back with our immune system, which is going to be a long and dense lecture. So go take a break, get a drink, get a snack, and come back and watch the next half. Okay. Until then.